Hey everyone, welcome back to Underreported Stories, where I cover the news that CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News fail to report on or don't report on enough. And today we've got so many crazy Tim Walz stories to cover before Election Day. They keep getting better and funnier and weirder, and today is no exception to that at all. But before we get into the crazy life of Tim Walz, I have a story to share with you guys. I tweeted this story out. It was about my travels to Syracuse, New York. And I want to pull up this tweet thread that I put out and take you through it because it really highlighted the illegal immigration / overflowing of migrants into the country predicament. And it's just so different when you see it with your own eyes. So I put this tweet thread out to kind of document everything as it was happening, but I really wanted to take you guys through it as well. So listening audience, you're not missing out on anything. A couple of pictures, but I think it's just more integral that you hear the story more than anything else. So I wrote, while I was boarding my flight to Syracuse, New York, I think 15 was a generous or under generous number. What's the word? It was an understatement to how many people there were there. There were 15 people in front of me. So I'm boarding from Syracuse or from LaGuardia to Syracuse. And all of a sudden they call group 6 and I start, going to, this is a Delta flight, by the way. And I start walking up there. And before I can even get through the line, like there is still a line for group 6 that I'm in. All of a sudden they say group 7. And I'm like, okay. And all of a sudden a family of like 15 migrants comes right in front of me. And I'm clearly cut off. They cut off another guy that was right next to me as well. And they all start boarding. Like the migrants start boarding, except for what I'm going to assume is the dad of the family. And so they start boarding, and the gate agent's like, no, you can't just like get on the plane. You have to stand here and we're going to scan your boarding passes. And so he's trying, the gate agent, to scan everybody's boarding pass and then give the boarding pass to the person, to each of the migrants. But none of them spoke English. So the main guy, the dad, had a translation app that he was speaking into in his phone and then putting it back. And it was so frustrating because the app wasn't working. These people didn't speak a lick of English. And so there was a guy behind us that spoke whatever language they were speaking and started translating for them. And this was a whole process of getting 15 people who don't speak a lick of English, just getting them to understand their name, get their tickets, and get on. I saw one kid take a ticket 3 times. And the Delta gate agent didn't do shit about it. But it was so interesting to watch the way in which all of this happened and just kind of the flagrant disregard for everything. And then they kind of got on, and I knew right away because I've been to the southern border. So I know what this migration pattern looks like. Once these people get into America, they get a little badge on their chest that has their name, their date of birth, their information. It's kind of just like, in case you get lost in the wild, here's how to talk to me. It's almost like they strap these people up as if they're children. And it is for their safety, but it was weird. And so when I was on the plane, I noticed that there was Royal Jordanian tags on everybody's bags. So you've got to assume, and I assumed just from looking at them, that they're Middle Eastern of some sort, either Jordanian, potentially Lebanese, given the war that's going on there, potentially even Palestinian, because where else would Palestinians fly out of if not for Jordan and Lebanon? And flights out of Lebanon are not as popular anymore. Again, given the current status of Hezbollah and Hamas, or Hezbollah and Israeli fight, or Israeli army being in a fight right now. So I noticed that these were probably people from either Lebanon, Jordan, or Palestine, or Judea and Samaria and the West Bank, or even potentially Gaza, although doubtful. And then I noticed that all of them had brand spanking new iPhones. And I think a lot of people took a note of this when I posted this. They were infuriated. Lots of people saying things along the lines of, well, I can't afford an iPhone. Why are these illegal immigrants getting access to? And I don't know if they're illegal immigrants. They're migrants. So they very well could have been vetted and going through the process, but we'll kind of get to that later. But I think a lot of people were frustrated. Why are migrants getting brand new iPhones? And they were taking pictures of everything. They had Snapchat already downloaded, which I found to be very interesting. They just had all their apps on there. And one of the kids actually, as we were boarding the plane, he was telling his brother, you could just tell from I couldn't understand them, but I could just kind of tell from what was going on with their movements and the way they were speaking to each other. Hey, could you take a picture of me? And he poses in front of the plane. I'm like, you're a little kid. You're a little kid. You're allegedly like this poor refugee that we're pulling out of awful areas and bringing to America. How is the first thought in your mind, take a picture of me in front of this plane? Something about it felt off. So as the thread goes on to say, when I arrived, I noticed, and I saw this on the plane, I just couldn't get a picture until I arrived. All of these immigrants, this was the main guy, this guy in the brown, he was the main one trying to talk to people. And these two people were individuals with the group IOM, and they came and there was a whole crew of, I would say, Arab Americans here to pick up all of these migrants. And they were taking people's bags, and they had the bag that said IOM. So I wanted to do a little digging. By the way, these were all the people, like this was just the women here, women alone. Think about how many people that is. So I started to do a little digging on IOM, long story short. And I learned that they resettle people from Egypt, Jordan, and Lebanon into Canada, America, and Germany. And so we went and dug a little bit further and found that, according to the Heritage Foundation, the U.S. is the largest contributor to the IOM with $682 million. That's how much we give. It's no small organization. It operates in hundreds of countries dealing with so many people, both refugees, migrants, etc. And again, I couldn't find anything out about the vetting process. And so you want to assume that because they are an NGO or some sort of large international body, that they're going through this in the, quote, proper channels. But if I have noticed anything about the work that NGOs are doing with immigration in the past, let's say, year of my time investigating this, it is that these people are not to be trusted. There are NGOs profiting, and the CEOs of these NGOs profiting in disturbing ways because of basically deals that these NGOs have cut with the federal government to get migrants across the border into America. So no, I don't trust these people in the slightest to do the proper vetting of people. And that's not to say that anybody on my flight was dangerous. The kids seemed fine. They wouldn't look me in the eye. I tried smiling at them or waving, and the kids were just like staring at me, blank-faced and scared. The adults didn't speak a lick of English, so they weren't understanding anything. So I couldn't tell. Obviously, you can't judge a book by its cover. But it was incredibly disturbing knowing that there were just people with potentially unvetted coming into Syracuse. And Syracuse is a sanctuary city, a college town and a sanctuary city. Those things, you shouldn't be allowed to say those things. Now, here was kind of my final thoughts on this. But what I found to be the most interesting was that there were two flight attendants on there. And this is me being just, I guess, I don't want to say, I'm not being elitist or snobby. I'm judging a book by its cover. When I saw these two flight attendants, they're white. I think the guy was potentially homosexual. I'm not positive, but they were two people. She kind of looked like a Karen. He kind of looked like he had to stick up his ass. And so I just kind of assumed that these two people were elite New Yorkers who were making this quick little flight over into Syracuse, and they were going to go back to New York City. Now, I was probably wrong. That was just me judging a book by its cover, given the circumstances that I was in. And I admit that. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do. I'm just saying this is how I saw the situation. And I actually sat down trying to get more video of the migrants and of the bags, and I couldn't do it. So I was like, F it, I'm just going to go down and get my bag and hope that they come down to get their bags, because they weren't really carrying much other than their IOM bags. So hopefully these migrants, whatever you want to call them, come down to baggage claim. And I'm going down the escalator, and behind me is my flight attendant. And I looked at him because he had been visibly angry with the migrants the entire flight, because they couldn't listen. They couldn't understand the rules of the plane. So they weren't following the rules, and it was pissing him off, and her. Both of them were pissed off. It was very obvious. And so I asked him, hey, I'm a journalist. I'm a citizen journalist. I just have a quick question for you. Have you noticed an uptick in flights between New York and Syracuse? Like, is there a big migrant crisis happening in plane rides between LaGuardia or just New York City in general and Syracuse? And he said, He couldn't speak to this flight pattern or specifically because he didn't usually take this flight. This is not his usual pattern. But he told me he's seen a, quote, significant uptick in migrants flying in the last year, and he seemed so visually irritated. Basically, I could just get the sense like he was looking at me like, please expose this. Please expose what we are dealing with every single day. So that was my eye-opening experience with the Syracuse-bound flight from last week. I found it to be fascinating. I saw it was getting a lot of traction on social media. Just figured I'd share it with the whole pod family. If you have thoughts on this, or if you feel a little outraged, just know that you're justified in your outrage. It is annoying. I'm not calling for anybody to take action against this, but I am calling you to take action in terms of investigating this, looking into it, figuring out whether this is happening in your hometown. Feel free to send a little message in the comments and let me know your thoughts, whether you've seen an uptick about migrants entering your community through the same way. But anyway, let's get into our docket for today. So we have 2 stories about Tim Walz. This man is funding some pretty nasty stuff as governor of Minnesota, and also reportedly had a fling with a CCP official's daughter, so that's interesting. We also have a story about a Montana Democratic operative reportedly tampering with ballot boxes, plus ballot boxes being lit on fire. We'll get into that. We also have 2 stories about gender ideology being covered up as well as tracked by some of the biggest government agencies. So, without further ado, let's get into the 5 underreported stories that you need to know. Today's show is brought to you by Based, my merch line. If you didn't know this already, I'm an independent creator, and the best way to support this show is by purchasing my merch line that represents your views. Instead of just asking you guys for donations to fund my independent journalism, my business partner and I created a line of merch called Based Apparel. Based means you are the opposite of woke. It means you're based in logic, you're based in truth, you're based in facts. You get it. Head over to basedinlogic.com to check out our latest apparel. My personal favorite right now is the conspiracy theorist hat. And remember, when you buy merch, you are directly supporting me and this show. And when you get your apparel, please be sure to tag me on Instagram so I can repost you. Tim Walz reportedly boosted a nonprofit that helps homeless people put drugs up their booties. As governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz put $100 million of taxpayer funds towards 135 nonprofits that provide, quote, vital services to the homeless population. Among the nonprofits that are getting taxpayer funds in Minnesota is a nonprofit called the Southside Harm Reduction Services. This organization provides syringes, sterile water, drug cookers, and lube that allows homeless people to ingest drugs through their buttholes. I apologize in advance for the crude nature of this, but this is what Tim Walz is actually funding. It says the organization has touted the paraphernalia. This is apparently called boofing, by the way. I'm sure that people are like, oh, Chrissy, you didn't know what that is. I don't know what that is. I didn't want to know what that is. But here I stand in front of you or sit in front of you and talk about boofing for homeless people. Anyway, the organization, Southside Harm Reduction, posts on Instagram about safer methods to ingest drugs and an efficient way to get high, because there's nothing like helping homeless people get off their feet, quite like giving them the tools to safely do drugs. We can get into the debate. Feel free to duke it out below whether you think we should be providing people with ways to safely do drugs or continue giving them. Just duke it out in the comments. I don't want to deal with it because my position is, why am I funding this shit? And I'm sure yours probably is too, but let me know. Anyway, the caption, we'll say, is incredibly gross. I don't know what else to say about this caption. It encourages people to do their duty before they stick drugs up their booties so that the drugs are absorbed better. And then they also say that it never hurts to have a boofing buddy or somebody that can watch you do the drugs up your butt. I'm lost. I'm so lost, guys. And it shows the kits with the syringes. This is what the actual caption reads. Yes, we got a kit for that too. Ours include 4 1cc syringes, 4 sterile waters, 2 deep cookers, 1 scoop, 1 lube, and a booty bump mini-zine. And then it's got like a picture of a peach. They know exactly what they're doing. So, how much did Minnesota spend on this? The Walz administration has given $104,365 to Southside Harm Reduction Services since 2020 for syringe exchange programs and other harm reduction initiatives, according to a state spending record. The Walz administration awarded $432,000 to Southside Harm Reduction Services in 2023 alone to provide low barrier access to harm reduction supplies. The organization has championed Walz as somebody that has been quintessential in helping give away drug paraphernalia. Okay. So this is what Tim Walz's thing is. This is the hill we're going to die on. Booty bumping for homeless people. I actually can't believe this dweeb of a human named Tim Walz calls conservatives weird when this is the crap he's funding. It's so weird. It's so weird. And you know what? It reminds me of that crack pipe story a couple years ago where blue states were giving out crack kits to homeless people. I believe it was in 2022. It was a big deal during the midterm elections then. And the mainstream media was constantly denying that this was some sort of right-wing conspiracy theory, and they were denying that the story was even taking place. There was no way that organizations were giving out syringes and ways to do crack safely until it was magically proven to be totally true. And it is completely true. You can go to vending machines in certain states, specifically blue states, and I believe even Virginia, and get access to crack pipes in a vending machine. It's not fake. It's real. And I think this just speaks to what the Walz-Harris administration is going to look like with spending up the wazoo. We already know that spending is going to go way up, but knowing that it's going to be spent on giving millions of dollars to harm reduction services that give homeless people access to booty drugs, this is just opt out, delete, don't want to be part of it personally. Just don't want to be. I'm assuming you don't want to be involved in that either, right? And Kamala Harris has to deal with these repercussions. I say it all the time. She has made a lot of dumb decisions. Tim Walz might be the biggest one. And she has been toggling. Oh, gosh. Sorry, just smacked the microphone. Where was I? She was, this is the Kamala Harris comments. She was she has been toggling between these two messages with Tim Walz, and she just made comments about this, that she was sleep deprived when she picked Tim Walz, but she went with her gut. Those are so diametrically opposed. Either you went with your gut and you're admitting that your gut sucks, or you were sleep deprived when you made the decision, which insinuates that it was a bad pick, and that therefore your gut is bad at picking things because you're sleep. My problem here, if you're with me, is that if your gut feeling was to go with Tim Walz when you were sleep deprived, and now you're admitting that you were sleep deprived and this guy probably isn't the best, why should we be able to trust you as our president? Because in all honesty, I'll probably get canceled for this, or Jimmy Fallon or Kimmel or whatever is going to clip this and put it on the internet somewhere else out of context. And I know people don't like me for saying this, but there are differences between men and women, and we should embrace them. And quite frankly, women need a lot more sleep than men do. You know, the 8-hour sleep recommendation that they give, it's for men. It's not for women. Women need a lot more sleep than men do. We should probably be getting 9 to 11 hours of sleep. It's really important. There's a reason why women wake up so groggy, and you'll hear all the time, oh, why, my wife is I'm always kicking her out of bed, or blah, blah. It's because we need a lot more sleep. Same thing, like this is off topic, but like daily caloric intake. They always tell you to like stay steady. That's not true for women. We have a cycle. So we are supposed to eat more calories in the lead up to our strawberry week. Okay? It's all these things that we have to understand, that there are separate categories and separate ways of living for men and for women. And you don't have to like my take. I don't give a fuck, because it's true. And the duties of the president were built around this idea of getting maybe less than 8 hours of sleep. And it requires tasks that are just easier for men's bodies to accomplish. And I'm certainly not saying that men are the only one who can do it and that women can't do this. I'm saying, generally speaking, it is a job better suited for a male body, and it takes a rare breed of woman to do it. If you are constantly tired, making decisions as a sleep-deprived human, specifically a sleep-deprived woman, it's not boding well for you. I don't want to vote for you if this is where your struggle is, and we're not even on to you being president. It's not like being vice president. It's much, much more difficult. But anyway, I've really strayed away from talking about good old Timmy Walz. So let's move back to him, and let's move on to our next story. So Tim Walz reportedly had a secret fling with the daughter of a top Chinese Communist Party official while he was teaching in China. The woman he had a fling with, her name is Jenna Wang, told the Daily Mail her story and submitted a bunch of pictures. We're going to go through that. I just want to caveat this by saying I do have a difficult time believing somebody who is sexually attracted to Tim Walz. That's like a red flag all around for me. The Daily Mail has an exclusive report on this romance between Jenna Wang, the daughter of a CCP official in 1989, and Tim Walz. So apparently they had a secret fling back in 1989, as Jenna Wang, now 59, claims that Tim Walz showered her with gifts and seduced her at his pokey staff accommodations at number 1 high school in Foshan, Guangdong province. I don't know, I don't speak Mandarin, so that might be a little difficult for me, but the story goes on to say the lovers, aka Jenna and Tim, could not risk holding hands or showing affection in public because her dad was a high-ranking figure in the Chinese Communist Party who would disown her for fraternizing with a Westerner. But their romance blossomed behind closed doors as they sipped tea, made love, and listened to George Michael hits, leading the then 24-year-old Jenna Wang to dream about marriage and a new life in the United States. There was no proposal ultimately. However, the shame of being treated, quote, like a prostitute eventually left Wang feeling angry and even thoughts of unaliving herself. I believe this is Jenna Wang right here. Tim Walz right there. Gosh, she looks so creepy. And this is her now. Now, I really found the pictures of this to be the most engaging. So if you're in the listening audience, I would encourage you coming over to the program just to see some of these pictures. I find it to be fascinating. This is more of Jenna's story here. It says, it was several months after he arrived in Foshan that Walz is said to have fallen head over heels for Jenna Wang, a pretty highly educated English language teacher at the nearby number 8 middle school. She was attending one of his lectures to brush up on her pronunciation when the then 25-year-old Walz slipped her headphones aside and whispered into her ear, "You are very beautiful." She said, "Tim was very handsome. I loved his eyes and his big mouth." Ew. He talked afterwards and he was very complimentary about my English. This is Tim Walz. Ladies, do we think he's attractive? No, he just looks too much like Tim Walz. These are other pictures that Jenna Wang supplied of Tim in China. She went on to say that my colleagues couldn't speak whole sentences, but Tim told me that if he closed his eyes and listened, it was like being back in America. Over the weeks that followed, the lovebirds grew closer, walking in the park and going to dances in the evening where there was less chance of being spotted by communist snoops. So that's her story, and I've got to assume that she no longer lives in China, given that she is telling this story. I think it is healthy to have some suspicion about this story because we should always be questioning people who are international sources, let's say. Now, I have doubts that Jenna Wang is working on behalf of China, and I also think that China would rather see Kamala in office. So I do think that both of those facts bolster Jenna's credibility to a certain point. I also find the accusation, generally speaking, a little weird. It was a fling. There was no assault per se. There was nothing wrong other than two people saw a situation very differently. Now, by Taylor Swift standards, this is unforgivable, worthy of an entire album. But it really does appear like this was a fling to Tim Walz and something more to Jenna Wang. If that's not the female experience in some sense, then I just don't know what is. There are men out there that have done me so dirty, and I don't think that their decisions in their early 20s and their dating life are super indicative of who they are today, because I don't know them. And I have my doubts that Jenna Wang knows Tim Walz. So I found this story interesting. It was worth reporting on, but in all honesty, my take is that it's kind of dumb and not really a crazy good indication of who Tim Walz is today. There are so many better stories out there about how horrible Tim Walz is. I just found this one to be partially fascinating, and partially I just wanted to showcase that there are some good stories about Tim Walz. The boofing story, great example, good story, like crazy. Keep highlighting that. This, I'm like, okay, let's get it out there on the internet so we can talk about it and move on from it, because this is just kind of silly. But let me know if you disagree. Maybe you guys are seeing this from a different angle that maybe I'm just missing. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. And while you're typing, let's move on to our next story. This is kind of a move away from Tim Walz, but into Democratic politics circles. So there is video evidence showing a Democratic operative in Montana tearing an election ballot drop box off the wall. This operative's name is Laszlo Gendler, and he was paid by the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee. So this is the organization that is tasked with overseeing the senatorial campaigns for Democrats, helping them get elected, doing their fundraising, etc. Now, if you are normal and you don't follow the intricacies of senatorial politics in this election cycle, who could blame you? But I am unfortunately one of those people that does know all about this stuff. So let me give you a quick explainer. Montana, which of course is a very red state, is actually a very big deal for the state of the Senate. One of the Senate seats that is up for re-election in 2024 is a seat that is currently held by a Democratic senator named Jon Tester. I wouldn't say he's moderate by any stretch of the means, but when he was elected, he appeared more moderate. And the GOP candidate that was running against Tester the last time around was kind of crappy. It wasn't the GOP's best work. But anyway, Jon Tester is now running against a very popular candidate on the GOP side. His name is Tim Sheehy, and Tim Sheehy is just destroying Jon Tester. He's up 7 or 8 points in most of the polls out there over Tester. So if we're thinking logically through this about the motives, perhaps, that would get somebody to this point, you can see where the desperation or the motive would come from for the Democrats to get involved and tamper with ballots. So this is a statement from the election administrator in the county where this incident happened about the whole pulling off the ballot boxes from the wall. This took place in Glacier County. So it says Glacier County has put up 2 official mail ballot drop boxes, one at our satellite office and one at the Glacier County detention/dispatch entrance, both under 24/7 surveillance. Yesterday, Laszlo, this is the Democratic operative with the Montana Democratic Party, was on camera tampering with one of the boxes. I did call him to ask what his reasoning was, and he stated, quote, we're going to insinuate that means the Montana Democratic Party, sent him to the location to see how secure the box was. Very suspicious. The Montana Democratic Party did not notify the elections office in any way to state that they would be sending someone to the ballot box to see how secure it was. So on camera, it looks like he was tampering with the box, which is so odd. I don't believe that for 1 second. I don't necessarily know if I believe this man was sent on behalf of the party. He could have done it on his own accord, but I don't believe that this was just a test That seems so odd because this ballot tampering with ballot boxes has actually gotten even more extreme. There is a story circulating everywhere about 2 ballot boxes, one in Washington and one in Portland, being burned down. The ever stupid Mary Trump posted a video of these ballots burning with the caption, "You think we're being hyperbolic when we say our democracy is under attack? This is what we mean." And you can see, if you're in the listening audience, there's a ballot box. The box itself is not on fire, but the ballots inside of it are, and someone is pulling them out. They're in flames, right? Now, I want to point out that this happened in Washington and Portland, and this one in particular, the video that you can see on your screen if you're watching on YouTube, Rumble, X, or Facebook, is a ballot box in a competitive district in Washington. So we don't know what party did this or what political affiliation the person who did this at the time of me recording this, by the way. Now, I like to think I'm an open-minded gal, and one of my favorite sayings has always been being based in logic. And logically, there is a line of thinking that would motivate at least 4 groups of people to commit this attack. But Mary Trump has already decided on X that it's her political enemies that did this before we actually know anything. So let me start out by saying, I don't know who did this because you don't know who did this because nobody knows who did this yet. Or at least at the time of recording, we do not know who did this. The ballot box burning in this video was in, like I said, a competitive House district in Washington. Washington is obviously blue, but that indicates there is, let's say, a chance that a Republican could win in that election. And there could be motivation for both a Republican and a Democrat to tamper in this situation. There's motivation for a Republican who is anti-drop boxes, saw a bunch of Democrats dropping off their ballots at this particular drop box, and he or she decided, we don't need those liberal votes, I'm burning them. Yep. That's a logical, it's not anything I would encourage or something that I believe to be logical. It's a line of logic that I understand how someone got to that conclusion, even though I don't disagree, or I don't agree with it, if that makes sense. But that exact same logic could then apply to a crazy Democrat too, right? They could see that the Republicans were actually turning out in a traditionally blue area, and boom, they got pissed off and they set fire to ballots. Both of those are possible. So I don't know how anybody has come to the conclusion that this is one party or the other. Also, this doesn't take into consideration 2 more groups, and I actually think that it is more likely that it's one of these 2 groups, not a Republican, not a Democrat, but some other people who may have been the culprit of this. So remember, geographically, where we are in the country. We are in what I would like to call Antifa territory. This is an area where a bunch of anarcho-fascists want to rule and have notably been disaffected and hateful towards both Trump and Kamala. They have motivation right now to sow distrust in our elections and stall the election of 2 candidates that group despises. I think there are people out there that really are simple-minded about this and thinking that young people like Kamala because Kamala isn't Joe. That's not true. There are a lot of young people who still feel disaffected by the 2-party system, generally speaking, and they feel disaffected by out-of-touch Kamala Harris. They don't feel the same way in the number of them. There were a lot more of them that felt that way about Joe Biden than Kamala. It's lowered, but it hasn't just dissipated because they changed their candidate. So that's an option. The 4th group, too, which no one's giving any talk to right now, is foreign nationals or someone that is actively attempting to sow distrust in our election system. And I don't mean for this to come across as some sort of Russia hoax, but we have an open border that has allowed who knows how many people to cross into our country. And if there's any way to sow more distrust in this election process, it would be to engage in behavior like this. So not trying to pull a Russia hoax, but it's not a far off possibility. And I think we will know who did this either soon or not. That's not an answer. We will know who did this soon if it was a Republican. We will know after November 5th if it was one of the other 3 groups I mentioned. Just watch, okay? So funny. Today's show is sponsored by Freedom 2.0. What's in your water? If it's not Freedom 2.0, it might be time to reconsider. Freedom 2.0's award-winning water goes beyond the bottle with an 8-step filtration process that includes reverse osmosis, UV light treatment, and an infusion of 432 hertz, the body's natural healing frequency. It's not just about hydration, it's about providing your body with clean, pure energy, free from the sugars and additives that other brands like to sneak in. Why settle for anything less than the best? Freedom 2.0 is hydration redefined. Ready to make the switch? Click the link in the show notes and elevate your hydration game today. For our next story, this has been wild. I've been talking about this multiple times all over the internet, all across my socials, but it bears repeating on the podcast as many times as possible. A top gender doctor is delaying the publication of a study because the results of the study aren't favorable to gender doctors. This is all coming from the National Institutes of Health, which was formerly run by Dr. Fauci, so we know where their priorities are. And a couple of years ago, I believe it was 2017? Fact check me. It's either 17 or 18, one of the two, so I'm not like super far off. Either way, the NIH gave nearly $10 million to a top gender doctor named Johanna Olsen, I believe. Let me get this right. Johanna Olsen Kennedy, right? To do a multi-year study examining the impacts that puberty blockers have and cross-sex hormones have on a child's mental health. So this was taxpayer funded. And because the research or the results of the research gave the doctors answers they didn't want, we now cannot see those results. I rarely ever do this, but taking from some of my own reporting here in tandem with the Washington Free Beacon, this Los Angeles-based doctor, her name is Johanna Olsen Kennedy, created this multi-year study to study and advocate for gender-affirming care. But the problem is she sat down with the New York Times and she said, quote, "I don't want our work to be weaponized. It has to be exactly on point, clear and concise, and that takes time." Even though the study has concluded it ran from either 17 to 18 or 18 to 19. And in that, they've been holding the results for years, regardless, whether it was 2018 or 2019. And I was in college in both of those years, and I'm at least 6 years out of college now, okay? So Olsen Kennedy, I think she just goes by Olsen for the most part, Johanna Olsen. She claims that the research could further embolden prohibitions on puberty blockers and surgeries for minors. That's because nearly half the states in the U.S. obviously have a ban, generally speaking, on gender-affirming care, and that's a bold statement because this just prevents doctors from providing puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, surgeries for minors that are not of their FDA-approved use. So Olsen Kennedy also told the New York Times that the kids' mental health did not improve. The top-rated doctor believed the results are skewed because the patients had... Okay, let me take this slower because this is so funny. So the results of the study that we haven't been able to see, but we know because Johanna Olsen is opened up about this to the New York Times, is that mental health among minors did not get better after they took cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers, even though that's what gender-affirming care promises to do for minors, right? Now, this doctor believes the results are skewed because the kids just came in with such high-quality mental health because they have gender dysphoria that there was no room for improvement, which is bats when you actually go and you read her own work, okay? I just did this research. Her statements are in complete contrast to her own research, okay? Linked right here. Her own research that shows that 25% of her gender dysphoric patients have severe anxiety. 51% reported feeling depression. 66% reported suicidal ideation, and nearly 25% reported a past attempt. So I don't know about you, I wouldn't call that high quality mental health to begin with, but sure, hide the research and see how that goes. The word that Johanna Olsen used time and time again is that we're too stupid to have the results because we'll weaponize the results. How about you're a researcher and the results are the results? And if they find something, maybe, perhaps, that the current standards are not helping kids, but further harming them, then I should be weaponizing this to institute change and help kids. This is so whack. And you know what? I have always been somewhat gaslit by the tea community, as I like to call them, because they always say, oh, well, just because the big pharmaceuticals are pouring money into us, it just means that they care about us. No. Motivation has always been a key part of this discussion, and I hate the way it gets brushed off. You cannot serve, I believe, you cannot serve two gods. You cannot serve big pharma and children, because big pharma right now is funding these gender studies that tell you that it's good. It's a good thing that we're giving kids and pumping them full of drugs and making them addicted to drugs and turning them into lifelong patients, right? And then simultaneously, they're creating the drugs that they tell you are good for your mental health. And then you do studies on it in the UK and in America that showcase that none of that is true, but it's about $1 million for a kid's gender transition. So wouldn't want to do anything to piss off the people that pay for our studies. You know, you see how this is key to understanding the issue? Because the people that benefit from the system will do everything to cover that up, as evidenced. So it is a very, very, very important factor in all of this, and it keeps getting brushed off, and it irritates me. But let me know your thoughts about this in the comments. I am dying to see this study come out. If there was a way to FOIA it and get this information out to you guys, I would be doing it, but it is private information to my knowledge right now. Although with it being an NIH study, I don't know. But there is one more story I want to get to in terms of underreported stories, and it still continues to speak about gender, so let's get into it. The Child Services Department has been working with the Biden-Harris administration to track transgender identifying minors on a secret database. An exclusive report from the Daily Caller found that an Ohio welfare agency created a confidential spreadsheet intended to track the sexual orientation and transgender identity. Wow, I'm just making up letters and words. It's a confidential spreadsheet tracking the sexual orientation and transgender identity of children as young as 5. There we go. So basically, this county division of Child and Family Services created a database tracking the trans identity and pronouns of children that interacted with the child welfare system, featuring entries between March of 2018 till August of 2024. The DCFS was one of 4 social service agencies nationwide chosen to research, develop, and evaluate trans ideology-based child welfare interventions that suggest parents and caregivers who don't affirm a child's orientation or confusion are unsafe and may have to have their children removed from their homes. Members of the Biden-Harris administration have called this a trailblazing movement and want to nationalize this model. This is what one of the spreadsheets look like. It's really just a spreadsheet if you're in the listening audience, but I'll got to take you through some of the different sections. One of them suggested purchasing a chest binder for a non-binary child and noted that at least one tracked child was 5 years old. The document tracked if children were trans or gender diverse, labeling them as pansexual, bi, gay, lesbian, straight, or questioning their sexual orientation. One entry for a boy listed as gay said, "You said he's gay because his peers told him so," which is not an indication that he's actually gay. Nearly half of the children in the confidential spreadsheet were listed as living outside of the foster care system in their own home with their parents. The spreadsheet notes if parents are accepting or rejecting of their child's gender confusion. So it is information that the government is collecting on the sexual identity of minors and whether their parents are on board with their child's sexual identity. That is a line too far, in my opinion. It's just weird. It's weird that the government is interested in tracking a kid's gender identity. There's no other words for it. We would be justifiably creeped out at the government's obsession with tracking an adult's gender identity. So when they do it with minors, it's extra creepy. Thursday's episode is going to be a guest episode with my friend Titus Smith, by the way. He and I met a few weeks ago in DC, and we immediately hit it off. I'm very excited for you guys to hear from him and the topics. I know you're going to laugh. If you're Rowan and you made it to the end of the show, will you drop the peach emoji? Gotta be a 12-year-old boy and make booty jokes about Tim Walz booty bumping kids. Anyway, thanks, friends. Thanks so much for watching. If you liked what you heard, please be sure to give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment about how beautiful, stunning, and funny I am. And if you want more content based in logic, be sure to click over here for more videos and clips of my show. If you have the means to financially support the show, consider purchasing from my merch line, Based Apparel, linked right below. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you back here next time. Bye, friends.